Workplace health and safety, it's definitely not the sexiest subject. In fact, it's probably not what most of us talk about on the pillow at the end of the day, but it really is important to us all. I used to be a private investigator. It was my job to spy on people who had been injured at work. I'd follow them around in their day and I would see what they did each day and whether or not that matched up with the injuries that they said they had. It was a pretty cool job. It was a little bit James Bond. I got to film out of a little button camera in my shirt, and I would go anywhere that people went. If they went into the lingerie section of a retail store, then that's where I was too. So I got good at being comfortable in awkward situations, but it led me to start asking questions around, why some of these incidents were occurring and what was causing them. And if you go back to the 1950s and look at when legislation really started for workplace safety, it became the role of the employer to make their workers safe. It's a very worthwhile cause. But with that, it created some challenges. And one of them is that the employers who manage the staff did what they do best. They created processes and they created systems for all this to be done. And they passed that down onto the workers on the front line and told them, you now have to do this. But the workers see it as a burden. And so there's constantly been this pushback. And for 65 years, we've seen the same problems exist. The main problem with safety is that the awareness that's needed from an everyday level by people on the front line just isn't there. The awareness of the consequences and the awareness of the risks and hazards that come with what they do. And so if you look at some of the stats around that, it's quite frightening. Nearly everybody knows someone who's been affected by a workplace incident or accident or had time off. It's occurring at a rate of one person dying somewhere in the world as a result of a workplace injury or illness every 15 seconds. In the same 15 seconds, 160 other people are injured. It has an enormous toll on people's families and the injured people that it affects. On a financial level, it's one of the biggest problems we face. It represents 4% of the GDP of a developed country. That adds up to $2.6 trillion a year with a T. So it's a problem worth solving. And I sat down with an engineer, Alan, at my kitchen table a couple of years ago. And we sat down with the idea that we could perhaps make it easy for people, make it easy for everyday workers who are out there on the front line who previously never had a say in what systems were adopted or what process they were going to use to stay safe. What if we built an app that made it super easy for them to create an inspection checklist? Because if people are checking and if they're looking at hazards regularly, then they become aware of what they are and they're more likely to find them before an incident occurs. The criteria for the app was that we wanted to make it flexible enough to be used anywhere in the world, because this is a complex area. Legal frameworks are different from country to country, and even from, say, aviation through to construction. They're quite different. And so we wanted an app that people could use anywhere. We wanted to try a collaborative approach, because most people think of safety as a pretty boring subject, and yet we wanted to see if people would bother to share it. Our thoughts were that it was mainly technology that was stopping them. It was difficult to share. It was usually paper systems, sometimes Microsoft Excel. It wasn't an easy way to share what you'd done. And so we developed a public library so people could freely share the checklists and the inspection forms that they build. And the final piece of the criteria was that we make it free. We make it free for every worker in the world to be able to get the best systems, not just the world's biggest companies. And so we released the app. It was called iAuditor, and it took paper systems and allowed them, while they're out in the field, create a digital form, take photos. They could mark up the images and draw circles and arrows and really highlight the problems. And in the first week, 1,200 people downloaded the app. And we thought, that's kind of cool. 1,200's good. But what was interesting was 30 people decided to share what they'd created. 30 people had created an inspection form, a mundane, boring inspection form about what they did each day, and they decided to share it. And so it was probably about 3 months after we released it. By this stage, we'd moved from the kitchen table into my garage, and there started to be a few of us. Alan still couldn't afford any shoes at that stage, we're barefoot. But here we were with this app being used around the world. it was probably 3 months after we launched it that an email came in on a Friday evening after we'd put out an update. The email was from a South American airline, and they had hundreds of aircraft, and they were using iAuditor to do their inspections. So they were able to find a hydraulic leak, and they could take photographs of it, document it, and then create a beautiful report and pass that around so other people could then act on it. But they said the update that we put out that day had broken the PDF report builder in the app, and they'd just gone fully digital now. And so in the past few days worth of audits and inspections, they couldn't get off their devices. And if we didn't fix this really quickly, they could be grounded. And so I rang Alan on the Friday night. The first thing I said was, we're never doing updates on a Friday afternoon again. But the second thing was, we've got some cool news that this South American airline is using our app. Like, they got steel tubes flying through the sky, and they're using our little app that we're making in the garage to be able to see whether it's safe or not, and along with some other things. But we fixed up the one line of code, sent it to Apple, and within a few hours it was business as usual for them. But we kind of looked at each other, and that was the first time that we sort of went, wow, this is really happening. And so as it went on, more use cases started to come through, and people were using it for things we never imagined. Researchers were using it in Antarctica to check their equipment. They had special gloves with touch points on them so they could use an iPad and be able to indicate what they were finding. Miners 4,000 feet under the ground in northern Canada were using it to do inspections, and people were doing a lot. They were doing inspections at a rate now of 1 every 2.7 seconds somewhere in the world with iAuditor, 32,000 a day. That's people mostly who weren't actually managing safety before. It's the frontline workers, the everyday people who are actually the ones exposed to the risks. And we've seen that little public library that had 30 templates that they shared, 30 inspection forms, now grow to become the largest repository of its type in the world. There's 54,000 different inspection forms in there now on just about anything you could imagine. So people are willing to share. It's taught us that they do want to help each other. And it turns out that people actually do want to come home at the end of the day. Safety does matter to us all, but frontline people hadn't been given the tools to actually manage it themselves. So we've now seen all this data come in, and we're making the data available to the world through our API, so other people can work with the data, and people who generate lots of data are able to mix that with other things like weather and activity monitoring and things like that. Some really interesting projects. We have a motto that everything we do is based around trying to give an everyday person this superpower in their pocket, the ability to be able to do their job safer than they've ever been able to do it before. And I would encourage everyone to be able to take a moment and think about how they can work safer each day. What are the risks and hazards? And it's that frontline part of your role type of approach to it, that level of awareness, that will help us solve this problem. Thank you.